the Board of Regents is going to approve this, or is supposed to, it's going to them for approval. When is that meeting happening? Because the email said April, but on their website it doesn't say that it's until May.
Yeah, the meeting hasn't been set yet. Actually, the Board of Regents is only required to review it. They don't actually have to approve. You know, they can change it. It takes a 2/3 vote. They do have to review it, and they are trying to find a date in April, mid to late April, to have that meeting and review it at that time.
Okay.
And they'll be reviewing the recommendations from all the campuses at the same time in the system.
Perfect. So in the report, when it starts to talk about housing, it talks about students who are uncomfortable in a dorm with a gun can request a transfer for a room. Is that transfer guaranteed?
Yes. I've talked to the housing people about this because there is a provision now where a student can change rooms. But it can be a little bit more difficult depending on the timing of the request. But on this particular instance, because of the nature of this issue, I asked that they be guaranteed that they would be able to. Now, there may be some time lag. It may not be within 24 hours, but they assured me that they can accommodate that.
How is Tech going to be able to do that logistically? Because they're...
There's really not going to be that many students that are BCHL holders. Texas A&M and University of North Texas both did a calculation for their campuses as to how many students in dorms they thought it would be. And using their methodology, here at Tech, we're talking about maybe 25 or 30 students. Would be the average. So it's really not that many students that would be living in dorms.
Okay. And whenever it talks about alcohol and how at anything that's serving alcohol under the Texas provisions on campus, there can't be a gun there. What does that mean for tailgating that happens in certain parking lots around campus?
I think that was discussed in the task force, and I don't remember exactly. We may have to talk to Dr. Stevenek about that conversation. I know that it was discussed. My recollection is that because I think the issue is that tailgating is outdoors, and you can already carry outdoors. It's only in buildings, so I don't think it affects tailgating because it is an outdoor activity.
I think that's right. We can clarify that for you,
Okay.
just to make sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can do that.
And then it also talks about a standing committee to be put together by the president. When can we expect that to be put together?
I think as soon as the OP is approved, the final approval of that OP, then if I'm the president, I'll go ahead and appoint that committee.
All right. And if a student is going to live on campus, or just students that are on campus that are CHL holders, do they have to register their gun on campus, or how does the
Now, really,
university
the
do
law
that?
doesn't allow you to require identification of a CHL holder. The only instance where they would need to identify is that we are requiring that if they live in a dorm, they have to have a gun safe, and that gun safe has to meet certain standards. So it may be necessary for them to identify to someone that they are a CHL holder and they're looking to secure their gun. It depends on what type of safe ends up being adopted. There are some institutions that have adopted rules already that are very prescriptive. It has to be a certain kind of safe, and here's the specifications and so forth. At A&M, I think they're going to require that a student either purchase a safe from them or lease it, so it is a very specific kind of safe. Other institutions have been less prescriptive, and our housing people are going to be discussing that here over the next few months, before the fall semester, to determine what the specifications are going to be. And if it turns out to be a safe that doesn't need to be secured to the floor or the wall, then a gun owner wouldn't have to identify who they are. They just would have a safe. And there are some students that may want a safe for other reasons, to have other safe articles that they want to keep. But if they do want it secured to the room in some ways, then obviously they'd have to notify housing for that purpose. But again, they wouldn't necessarily have to say they're a CHL holder. They'd say, I want to have a gun, safe for my valuables, and I'd like it secured to the floor or something.
Okay. And what about athletic facilities? Because it talks about how guns are prohibited at venues like the Jones or the USA,
Mhm.
but what about facilities like where athletes practice or work out?
It's only where there's athletic competition going on.
Okay.
So practice facilities would not be involved.
Okay. And do you think that this will have any impact on enrollment?
No. You know, I think there's a lot of concern about it, and for good reason. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about this type of law. But if you look at the other states that have adopted them, typically there's been a lot of concern when it's first implemented, and then things kind of calm down. And again, there's really not that many students that are going to be CHL holders. We'll have some staff people, obviously, or faculty members that could be, but again, it's a very small part of the population. So, you know, as long as there's not an incident, you know, things will quiet down and it'll be fine. I think if there were going to be an issue for enrollment, we would have known about it by now. And certainly there's nothing in the fall enrollment numbers to suggest. In fact, we're not even getting many questions about this issue.
Okay. And what costs are going to be associated with this, like signage or the safes and dorms, or just any type of costs?
There will be cost. The exact numbers we don't know yet because the signage will need to be ordered. The main issue is going to be, I think, once if the Board of Regents goes ahead and allows these rules to go through, the main question mark we have has to do with laboratories, because there's certain type of laboratories that will be off limits, and each one of those labs will have to have a sign associated with it. So I think they're already, the facilities people are already looking at that based upon what we've recommended already, and trying to figure out how many labs we have that are going to be qualifying for that. But the signage is really the biggest cost. Now, there also could be costs related to the police department and doing training. The task force did recommend that training be provided. Student government leaders have been talking to the police department about that training. So there could be some costs associated with that as well.
And what about for the safes in dorms? Do students have to buy those, or will housing provide them?
It'll be up to the CHL holder to pay for the safes.
And as far as these costs, like signage that you discussed, where will that come from? Like, should students expect to see an increase in fees?
No, it won't be that significant. You know, again, that'll be a fairly minor cost for the signage, but it'll come out of facilities funds.
Okay. And will CAs in housing need some new additional training to?
I think that's something the housing people need to consider. Now, obviously there's only 4 or 5 dorms where a CHL holder can live. So for those dorms, I think is how the housing people will probably look at some training there. There's been, my understanding, I was not a member of the task force, but my understanding is that there was discussion in the task force about this whole issue of training and who might benefit from training and how that should be done. So that's one of the issues from an implementation standpoint that will still need to be worked out.
Okay, and because it kind of talks about like additional training kind of towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
So students who are already at Tech and faculty and staff, what kind of training can they expect to see? Will it be something like online, like Alcohol EDU, or will it be something that they attend?
I know the only discussion that I've had so far about that is it could be a hybrid. I think doing some kind of online component is something they definitely talked about doing, because that would be the easiest way to reach the most students. So I think it would be, there would be something like Alcohol EDU. In fact, I think that was even used as an example of how to do that. But I think there's also discussion of maybe more in intensive kind of training for those that might want it. And I think that's what the police department and the student government leaders have been talking about.
Right. And what should people do on campus if they see someone with a gun? Because, you know, before they could just call the police, but now they're not sure if they're a CHL holder or not. So, like, at what point does something happen?
I think there's actually a provision, I don't know if it was in the OP or not, but that has been discussed, and the part of the education process will be anytime a student sees anybody with a gun, they call the police. And again, a CHL holder, by law, they have to conceal that weapon. If it's drawn for any purpose, then we want the police there. There's no reason for them to draw their gun other than an event that the police would need to be there for it.
Or worn on their hip,
Mhm.
right, because concealed is just that, so differs from open carry, so yeah, no one should even be wearing on their hip, even if they see that.
Okay.
Yeah, in the education process, that is one thing that has been discussed. It's very clear is that anyone who sees somebody with a gun, they should contact the police, because even if it's a CHL holder who just hasn't done a very good job of concealing their weapon, someone needs to draw that to their attention, because technically they're violating the law.
And it talks about if students, or if a CHL holder has their gun on campus, but they're going to like a building where, like, say they're going to like the King's Chapel where like guns are prohibited, they just take it out to their car. Like, what do they do?
That, yes, I mean, that's probably what they would do. If, kind of depending on how close they are to, where they're living, but, under current law, a CHL holder can carry a gun on campus, any place except buildings.
Mhm.
So the presumption is whatever CHL holders we have now, they probably store it in their cars. And so that would be the situation in case of any off-limits places going forward.
Okay. And is there anything else that you want to tell me, or any of your thoughts overall about the recommendations you got from the task force or implementation?
I think the task force did a good job. This is a controversial issue. A lot of people are unhappy on both sides of the issue, apparently. And there are many more things important to Texas Tech than this. Many more things I'd rather be dealing with today than this. But it is the law, and I think the task force did the best job that it could of balancing what's required by the law with what the needs of the campus are. And I think they made the comment, and I've made the comment in the past. This is an evolutionary policy, because there's a lot of uncertainty regarding the implementation of this law. As we go forward over the next year or two, in particular, I think all campuses across the state will be trying to figure out what's really the best way to do this. And so I would expect that there'll be proposed changes to the policy as we go along. And I think we should respond to those things.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.